This is Your Spiritual Game Plan, and I am your host, Sherry Fletcher. Change. It happens to all of us. You've invested your time and energy into an important role, sometimes for years, and then suddenly it's time for you to move on. Maybe you've worked hard on a dream and now your path is taking a new turn, but that dream isn't going with you. Perhaps you've raised your kids and they've moved on, but now your empty nest is filled with parent care. Maybe you're in the middle of diaper changes and laundry piles. If you find yourself asking questions like, where do I fit in anymore? Am I even relevant? How do I find my purpose now? You are in the right place. This is a show for women in a season of transition. I believe that while your roles in life will change, your purpose is eternal. I'm here to help you understand just how intentionally you were made by a creator with a game plan. Through interviews and inspirational guests, we'll discover ways to help you unlock the purpose God placed in you, develop a game plan for your life's calling, and embrace the intentional masterpiece you were created to be. Today, I'm talking with Amanda Davison from A Wife Like Me. Amanda is an author, writer, speaker, and host of the podcast, A Wife Like Me. Marriage is hard. It's also so rewarding. It's a journey that takes us on many detours. Amanda's book, Dear Wife, 10-minute invitations to practice connection with your husband. It's like having a marriage map to keep you on the path God intended. Whether you're starting out in your marriage or celebrating big milestones, staying connected is the key to success. I'm glad you're joining me for episode 103, How to Practice Connection with Your Husband, with guest Amanda Davison. Amanda, thank you for joining me today on Your Spiritual Podcast. I know that you're going to be a blessing to those that are listening, and I'm just glad that you took the time out of your schedule to meet with us.
Thank you. This is so awesome. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, you and I, as we discussed earlier, we're both sevens. So that's another thing we have in common, an Enneagram 7. And you mentioned in one of your podcasts, and then I read on your blog site that you are a hot mess after 8 to 9 p.m. And I love that because I am too.
Yeah.
I know that I have to wrap up most things by 9 o'clock for everyone's safety and everyone else's protection. In fact, I know that we're told scripturally not to go to bed angry, but sometimes I think that our discussions can get really dumb after 9 o'clock. And so a lot of times, like, it's almost 9 o'clock. Maybe we should table this and talk about it in the morning. And a lot of times in the morning, we're like, what were we thinking? That was just ridiculous. So 9 o'clock's kind of our discussion cutoff time.
Yeah.
And then even though I'm an empty nest, I get up by like 4:30 in the morning just to have quiet time before the dogs and the husband and life goes on. And so I like that you are the same in that as well. But I'd love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about your family and your ministry and how God placed a wife like me in your heart.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm married. I'm up north in Minnesota, and I'm married to a farmer, and we have 3 kiddos. And, I grew up, my parents divorced when I was 5. But I loved relationship. I loved dysfunction. I know that sounds really weird, but I was just fascinated with why some relationships seem to be really healthy and then others are really difficult. And so I was just, from a young age, I remember thinking, I wonder why that is. And I really was just interested in relationship from a young age. And so I went into my undergrad was in psychology, and then I went on to get my master's in counseling. And I took about 6 years off in between those 2 programs. But when I went back, at that point I was married, and we had 1 kiddo. And then I was finishing up my grad school. We had another kiddo. And somewhere along there, I was just so unhappy, and I was progressively becoming more unhappy in my marriage. And I was so frustrated that I was in grad school to help other marriages, and yet I wanted to divorce myself. So that was a problem, as you can imagine. One day I left my husband. I took our 2 kids and I left. And that's really when everything began to change. I knew that, I grew up in the church. and I knew who God was. I knew that he existed, or at least I believed it, and I thought he was a big part of my life, but I had no idea that there was a difference between really knowing that God exists and believing that he exists, and then surrendering every part of my life to him and actually following him. And so that Sunday, I had left during the week. I ended up coming back home, and that Sunday I gave my life to Christ, and for the first time opened up my Bible. And so that was in 2012. And really since then, it's been a huge change for me personally. Obviously, as you can imagine, kind of coupling or marrying what I knew to be kind of research driven in the field of counseling and psychology with scripture. And so it's been awesome, but I've also known this whole time that I can't do this alone. I knew God was calling me to speak into wives, but that my story is just part of the story. And I'm really passionate about, figuring out how we can serve wives best. And so A Wife Like Me started in 2018, and we have a contributing team of writers who have just amazing wisdom and different experiences. And so as a team, we pour into other wives. And so, we do that through our podcast, A Wife Like Me podcast. We have our book, Dear Wife. And we have video teaching. We're online all the time, lots of graphics, lots of support in our Wife Like Me gathering group on Facebook. We're just loving it. And so that's kind of our ministry of A Wife Like Me.
Yeah, it's such a needed ministry. And I just love that it's out there for wives. And we'll talk a little bit more of that as we go on. So before we get into too much heaviness, let's do some fun facts. So if there was a profession other than what you're doing, because it's a great passion of yours, but is there a profession other than what you're doing right now that you think would be fun to attempt?
I am, in my mind, I think that I'm not musically inclined at all. I'm literally tone deaf. I cannot sing at all. But my daughter, she's 11. She just started taking guitar lessons. And there's been this part of me forever that I can't I think I want to play the guitar because I can't sing. Yeah. And I love music. But anyway, I probably won't do it. But if I had to choose one, that's maybe what it would be.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. So if there was a food that you could eat every single day and there's no ramifications, you could just eat it, but you could eat it every single day, what would that be?
Well, I probably already do, and it's ice cream. I'm literally obsessed with it. I love it so much. I love it. I mean, it's bad. It's like a problem.
One scoop.
Oh,
that's great. Yeah. I love that. So your message is, like I mentioned earlier, such a needed dialogue for all marriages, but I think it is so critical in today's culture. And I'm so proud of you. I'm going to say that as a sage wife. I am so proud of you for taking this topic on, because it is becoming less popular, and it's becoming less of a priority. Marriage, is becoming, it's just not talked about as much, but being a wife is really not getting discussed about the vitality of what, to a marriage. And why I say it's vital is because the roles of a wife are being made to be seen as weak. And when we hear the word submissive, it gets the connotation of maybe being dominated. But we're also getting bombarded with the message that men are not needed. And in fact, needing and serving in a partnership with your husband is actually being presented as a bad thing. And so you start off your book talking about your wedding day and the significance of the march down the aisle. And I have never thought of it in that perspective. And I would love for you to share that perspective of, you marching down the aisle and what that means.
Well, I want to speak first to what you just mentioned, because it's so important. And I think that, you said something interesting to me, Sherry. You said, that marriage is being seen as, or wives are being seen as weak and or submissive, which I don't know if that's true. I think that that's true from the Christian, for maybe non-Christians looking into those who, call themselves Christians, so that maybe from the culture sees Christian marriages, Christian wives in particular, probably as such, or that because I think for years that's maybe been the message, unfortunately, that the church has shared or maybe affirmed, in which I would really, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think it's important that leaders, especially, and leaders, I'm talking you, if you're listening, you're a leader. I'm very passionate about that. You are leading. You are either influencing people for the good or for not the good. And so you are a leader in your home, when you're at the grocery store, within your community, you're a leader. So own that first off. But really, like, I don't think that a weak, submissive role for a wife is at all biblical. If anything, I think that we have to be really clear. And this was a tension that I had when I came to know Christ at 29, is that for the first time ever, I questioned my, if you want to call it, my place or my role. I had never felt that I was supposed to be quieted until I became a Christian. And so I really had to question, where is this coming from? And I wanted to dive into that, because that's not the Jesus that I knew. I knew that God made me with a unique wiring. And I thought, well, I'm not quiet. God, you gave me a voice. You gave me a voice to use. And I know that it's an important one. And I know that it matters. And I know that, I've never that I'm sort of fiery. And Lord, I know that that's for your purpose. Like, you made me that way on purpose. And I don't know that your word tells me or is asking me to be quiet. And I think that, unfortunately, for years, the Christian church has maybe said that that's what we're supposed to be. And in fact, it's not that. From the beginning, God made us with such influence and such power. And so we have a huge calling, and we have a huge role to step into within our marriages and within our homes. And that is not one of being quiet. And that is not one of being submissive in a way that is taken advantage of. Absolutely not. Is we are submissive to Christ.
Right.
There's a dual partnership in marriage where both spouses are submissive to God. That is powerful.
Yeah.
There is no use or abuse or oppression within the marriage union in the way that God created it to be. So I guess I just wanted to say and speak to that first, is that, man, if you're listening, and if you are a wife or a wife, encourage her. This is a big, big, big deal, and it is awesome. And I just wish that the culture heard that from the church, because this is awesome, and it's a big role, and we have a lot of work to do, and we're influencing the people around us. And so anyway, I just want to speak to that. But
I work with youth, and that's been one of the topics when I do talk on marriage, is that the word submissive, wives submit. And the youth that I talk to, they have a big hang up with that, because they see it as being dominated. And I'm trying to show them the submissive as in a respect issue. Because there are roles, my husband and I have so many strengths that are different. And when my husband is in his environment and it is his strength, at that time, it's not my place. It's like, this is where he's at. This is his role. This is where he is shining. And I'm supporting that. And vice versa. When I'm, speaking or doing stuff, he's supporting it. And so I look at submissive as in a respect and a partnership and a support in the strengths, supporting each other's strengths. And not in a way where I'm told to just sit in a corner and be quiet. Because I'm like you, I'm fiery. I've got opinions. I've got an agenda. And so I need to work on where that fits in my marriage, but it's not to be, God's not asking me to quiet it. He's just asking me, there's times in the marriage, but.
And I love, Sherry, that we're talking about this. I had to look up the verse quickly because I wanted to make sure I got it right. But, the church has misused and abused. And we need to say that, because the church has misused and abused Ephesians 5 verses 22, which focuses on what you just said, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. But what the church has not focused on is the verse before that. We never We rarely hear the church focus on the first opening verse in that whole passage that sets up the entire remaining passage in Ephesians 5, which is Ephesians 5:21, that again, most pastors, most churches leave out. And it says this: submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, out of love, out of awe, complete humility, complete wonder of Christ, submitting to one another. And that's different. That's a different message, completely different message. But most churches, pastors start with just verse 22. Wives submit, you submit. It's this dual, but let's back it up, and we don't look at the entirety of that passage. And so, yes, we submit, and yes, they do too. We both submit to Christ, and that is attractive. And it doesn't downplay, but there's also a reason that, because it's more difficult for us, I will say. And just look at Adam and Eve in the garden. I mean, Eve straight up went her own ways. Eve knew what she wanted and she went for it. And I love that about her. She reminds me of me. And she also got herself in trouble, like I have, and so like there's a beauty there that God put in her and in us. And also I believe that God, I mean, he doesn't make mistakes, right? So like he knew that we would need that extra bit of like, hey girl, remember, I have your best for you. Yeah. Like I do. So just remember that. Because we are strong women. And so like rally that in, Chica, like remember who I am and remember who I've called you to be and remember what I've called you to do. And so, again, I just think I don't want us to leave out that verse 21.
Right. That's so important. And so, and thank you for sharing that, because that's wonderful. And so going back to you going down the aisle, I love that picture.
And yes, thank you. First to this book, what I love about our book, it's called Dear Wife, 10-Minute Invitations to Practice Connection with Your Husband. Our team wrote this. So it's not just me. And this first invitation is from Natalia Durham. And so she's one of our contributors. And she, because here's a frustration, Sherry. We as wives often feel, if we're completely honest,
yes,
we can feel like this. And I know that I'm not alone because I hear this is what I do all day, but we feel like, we're frustrated. We're tired of trying. Like we're sick and tired of being the one to initiate. And I hear that often. And because I have felt that, and it took me years to really wrestle with that and like, oh, okay, Lord. So this is really, we started here because it's important to remember that we're going to feel like, why am I doing the work? Why am I the one that's encouraging us to go to church? Why am I the one that is reading a book about how to improve our marriage when you're not? Why am I calling a sitter to get a date night? Why am I the one? And you know what? I don't know that I want to do that. I'm kind of sick of that. And so that's the place where the enemy wants us to go to. And honestly, I felt like that all the time before I knew Jesus. So I love that, Natalia, we wanted to open up to remind wives that what we see Jesus doing in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, he starts and he calls two brothers to him. And he kind of gets their attention and he says, hey, are you listening? And they are. And he says to them, just follow me. I'll show you how to do this. I'll show you the way. I'll show you how to journey with me. I'll show you how to do it. I'll show you how it works. And so they do, but they go toward Jesus and they move toward him. And it's important that we remember that our walk, this journey with him, is truly that belief in what Jesus has already done, and then us really entering into that, because he's never gone anywhere. He's never went anywhere. I thought of this morning, is it's almost like I think of the first dance at a wedding. I think of like this whole, at least for me, I'm doing my own thing, like off in the crowd, and I'm like, I'm chatting it up with people at the dance, at the wedding dance. I'm over there getting some food. I'm laughing. I'm doing my own thing. All the while, like Jesus is right in the middle of the dance floor, just standing there, just like waiting for me to come to him. he never has gone anywhere. And I long to be with him, but I'm so busy and I'm distracted and I'm talking and I'm doing all the things that it's like he's just waiting for us and for me and for you to just say, okay, I'm coming now. I'm going to come. And just like that picture of us walking down the aisle toward our husband, they stand there and we continue to walk toward them. And we are not in any way saying that there's no effort involved in both spouses, but God absolutely did put, I believe, a fire in us to initiate. And I don't think that that's anything that we should look on as bad. In fact, I think we can applaud and encourage each other to use that. That is not anything that is negative. It's something that we can use to our benefit in our marriages and our families. Yeah. We create this beautiful union, and God has uniquely wired us to play a very important role in that. And so we invite and we encourage the wife as she reads and she begins reading to really just acknowledge that and accept the beauty of that and not be frustrated by that, but then communicate as well about that as we move along through the book. But it's a beautiful journey walking down the aisle and continuing that in marriage, but also first and foremost in our relationship with Christ.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just love that vision. And that really helped me because I have often, I'm going on my 29th year of marriage, and there's times when I'll be like, why do I have to be the one? And just seeing that image was so powerful to me. One of the topics that is so misunderstood, and we talked a little bit about this before we went on, is the concept of obedience. It's sometimes even hard to say the word obedience, but it's like we're living in this time of extreme independence. We want to empower women. We want to empower our daughters. We want them to, be strong. But marriage is no easy calling. And so when we're talking about surrender and then we add in the word obedience, that can bring up some emotions in women. But why is it so important to help us understand the role of obedience as God intended it?
I think obedience is really faith in action. I mean, it's engaging our faith. It's the outward expression of our inward belief in Jesus. And it's like, it's a beautiful thing that we get to experience with God as we, I once heard Jill Briscoe say that courage is on the other side of obedience. It's waiting for you on the other side. And it's so true that whether it's, hey, call your husband right now and tell him that you feel like the Holy Spirit is nudging you to do, or sit down and just be still with God, or go get something for your neighbor, or whatever, big, small, everything in between. Whenever we act on the nudges from the Holy Spirit and we put forth the evidence of our obedience, which is that acting on whatever it is that God is calling us to do, we get to experience more of God because we're trusting in him that, Lord, this doesn't make sense. Lord, I don't want to. Lord, I don't really understand this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And whenever we do that, then we experience the beauty and the courage that he has waiting for us on the other side, but we don't ever get to experience that if we don't. And so within marriage, I mean, the beautiful act of surrender, obedience is not for wives. Obedience is for all of God's children. And he invites us into that journey with him. And we can't be obedient if we don't trust him. And so it's this dependence and belief in God is who he says he is. I believe that for me personally. And I want to experience more of that. I want to partner in the work that he has for me here. And I'm going to partner with him by trusting him and engaging my life in that faith walk. And I'm going to trust in whatever he's asked me to do, and I'm going to do it. It's like, and that's a scary thing. I think right away when I came to know Christ is I would pray because I wanted to be all in, but I didn't know what that was. And so I would just pray, Lord, I trust you with my life. I trust you with my marriage. I trust you with my family. Use us in whatever way. I trust you. Just use us, use us, use us in whatever way you want. And that's really obedience. It's that full surrender of, I don't care how you use us, because I trust that it's for your good and for your glory. And I want to just so badly be a part of helping others know you, that I'm willing to surrender my whole life to you. I trust you. And I trust that your plan, whatever you ask me to do is going to be good. And however hard that is. So I'm all in. And that's that obedience, but we can't, it's different than just saying we believe in God, really. I mean, faith is unseen, and it's really believing God is who he says he is. But then walking in obedience is the daily surrender and dependence on him. And that's beautiful. That's just beautiful and hard.
It's very hard. Well, what I was thinking while you're saying that, I loved how you said, courage, obedience, or courage is on the other side of obedience. And like I mentioned, we're wanting to empower our daughters, empower women. The world is saying that means submissive is weak, obedience is dominance. That's what the world is telling us. But what I got from what you just said is it's actually obedience is empowering. It is empowering.
Yes. And that's what we, again, Sherry, I'm just glad that you're sharing this. And for anyone listening, share this message, because that's exactly the message that we as Christian women have to be so loud and clear on. Is the most powerful place that we can be in is in a place of surrender. Yeah. And submitting to God's will, that trusting his will, and being willing to get our boots on the ground and say, bring me to the places you want me to bring me, in my home, in my community, everywhere, anywhere, I'll go. And that is powerful. The Holy Spirit empowers us as we surrender and lay our lives down for him. And that's the most powerful place we can be. Yeah. But in any other place, we aren't going to experience that. In getting our way, in fighting for our independence, we're never going to experience that ever. But again, as you say, and the culture is telling us that we will. And it's just exactly completely upside down in the kingdom.
Yeah, I love that message. So as I said, I've been married for almost 29 years. And I think if I were to be asked for advice, I would say there's two words that are just the key to the core of this, and that's intentional commitment. And the key to that would be communication. And it sounds easy, communication. Well, sure, we communicate, but it gets glossed over, especially with the busyness, like the season you're in with child rearing and then careers and day-to-day life. And a lot of times we can lose the intentionality of our communication. And when that happens, it can be very destructive. And your devotion, which is Dear Wife, 10-minute invitations to practice connection with your husband, is such a powerful tool for this day-to-day busy routine, to just take out the 10 minutes and find an invitation to practice this connection, because it can be put on cruise control. I know that sometimes you just take for granted that your husband's there, you're just busy, like, here's your dinner, you keep going. And we don't stop to have that intentional communication. And you share 4 reasons that couples experience that destructive communication. I'd love for you to just briefly share what those 4 reasons are, and then how this devotion can actually help with that communication.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important when we sit down, and even if we are listening right now and we think, I'm just going to go and listen to all these ways that we can fix our communication, those are helpful, and those are like tools, absolutely, but they can really be band-aids at the same time if there are these underlying really reasons why no matter how many tips and tricks you have to help your communication, it's just not going to get any better if these things are going on. So that's why I love sharing about them. We have destructive communication for many reasons, but these are just the main ones. One is ignorance. Honestly, if you've grown up in a home where there's dysfunction, any type of unhealthy communication patterns of any kind, if your personality traits are more inclined to overpower or demean or disrespect your spouse, those aren't helpful. And maybe you're naive or you don't even know that that's within you. You can be ignorant about your own insecurities as well. If we have any of those things really from our past and within us that make communication unhealthy, if we don't know what those are, that's a huge reason for why communication still isn't getting any better. Another reason we have destructive communication is because we have unresolved wounds. So often we sit down and expect to have healthy communication with our husbands when it's not going to happen because we're still frustrated about what they did, I don't know, a month, a year, 10 years ago. Or we have really biases against our husband because of what our dad did to us when we were a child, or he never did to you or for you or said to you or about you, or, you know, if we have unresolved wounds, any kind of familial hurt, unmet expectations, any abandonment issues, any unresolved pain is going to be directed toward our husband. And so then that looks like within marriage and within communication, it looks like fear, jealousy, manipulation, defensiveness, passivity, blaming, all the things. But really reality gets distorted and communication gets distorted. We are unable to hear, so receive and give healthy communication because there are barriers there because we have unresolved pain and wounds. So that's another one. Another reason we have destructive communication is because we're defensive. Really, we have a lot of pride within us. We often think that you have things that you need to fix more than I do. So that's a problem. You know, whenever we are in that place where we're more focused on what they have wrong or what they did bad or what they need to apologize for or whatever, we're in a place in communication where we're going to be in a stronghold. Really, we're not going to find resolve. We're not going to feel connected in that communication because we have defensiveness and bitterness in our heart. Another reason then for destructive communication is we lack biblical community. As a culture, even within Christian community, true biblical community where we are sharing our difficult places, where we are sharing our burdens, where we are sharing our sin, where we freely and openly share our wounds, our insecurities, what we're struggling with. And when we're not doing that, we're not receiving truth, we're not receiving prayer, we're not receiving healing, we're not gonna be moving forward in communication in a healthy way. It's just so vital within our homes to have a biblical community outside of our homes. So those are just some reasons why we have destructive communication. And then really, I mean, again, we wrote the book for busy women. We wanted every single invitation to be a win. We looked at the ways Jesus himself created connection with people. And we want wives to feel every single time she opens up and does a 10-minute invitation that she's going to get a win in her marriage. And so these are really, they're non-threatening ways for you to connect with your husband and bring up questions, just ask non-threatening things or initiate something that is maybe just uncommon in your marriage and kind of breaks up the mundane and adds, again, a deeper level of connection and helps break down what's destructive and help grow just healthier communication.
Yeah, I love that. One more thing before we wrap up to talk about, I consider this like a map, a marriage map. And I love a good game plan. I love having strategic things to work on. And one of the things in the chapters you talked about how easy it is to get distracted. I mean, Satan loves nothing more than to get our marriages detoured. And so how have you seen that played out in your marriage? And what do you do to stay focused on your own marriage mission?
I think that for all of us listening, our own marriage mission should be really just Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
In all of, we're gearing up for some things coming up with a wife like me. And I mean, that's really the mission. That's a mission, whether you're single, married, divorced, remarried, you're a teenager right now, you're whatever, your mission is Jesus, making him known, period. And so within a marriage, how do we do that? Within a friendship, how do we do that? Within at working with our coworkers, how do we do that? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. But man, distraction is Satan's number one tool right now in everything, every areas of our lives. Personally, it starts with us personally. Before even we talk about it within marriage, personally, if we are so distracted that we are not aligning our thoughts, aligning our hearts with God, with Jesus himself, we're going to miss everything. So it starts with us individually. How does that look for us? Within marriage, man, I mean, talking, literally, we have 3 kids, 11, 7, I had to think, 11, 7, and 4. And so, I mean, for us, we have to get out of the house. Literally, like I gotta go. I mean, we have spurts here and there where we're like, you guys, mom and dad are talking, you need to go in the other room. We're talking right now. We have that, but it's not the same. And it's not the same as just looking into each other's eyes and putting our phones on silent. So that's a huge way. We have sitters, and especially my husband farms, so we have busier seasons. And I heard someone tell me years ago to load up, like go into a hard season with a full tank of gas. Also counseling, we go to counseling, love counseling, love it, love it, love it. Also, and that's virtual. We do that virtually. We literally, our kids are old enough, they stay upstairs, we go downstairs. And then we lead our marriage mentor team at church. And so we do marriage mentoring as well. We get mentored by another couple once a year. So we pull the weeds out of there, like the big weeds that are coming up. But then the counseling is where everything is at. A good Christian counselor, man. Oh, so good. So those are just a few. Oh, and intimacy. Open, honest conversations. This is another thing that I hear couples just afraid to maybe talk about even, so if you go to A Wife Like Me, sign up for our email that we send every single Friday, you'll get our intimacy conversation guide and all of our freebies you'll get with that. But that's one of them. And so it really has like 5 questions on there to talk. Just ask your husband, ask each other, just to have a conversation about your intimacy and what are you happy with? Is there anything you would like to change? Because if we aren't talking about it, then we're not changing anything and we're not helping each other. And if we're not helping each other, then what? So we should really think about it. We should really want to sit down and talk about it like right now, like, because we should want each other satisfied and really healthy and intimate in that way. And so just glorifying God with our intimacy is so hugely important. So I guess, and we're not perfect at it. If you've listened to our podcast at all, or have heard our lives, my husband and I are on completely different pages, and that's very common when it comes to intimacy. So it's just super important that we find our footing as even just years go by and how things change, and continuing that conversation.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Everything about you is going to be in the show notes. You did mention your Facebook page and signing up for that intimacy guide. That is so important. And so as we close, I like how you talk about things being an invitation. Your book says invitations. And that seems a little bit more approachable than the how-tos. How did you come to see that union with God in the marriage as an invitation?
That's a great question. I think that just looking back on my own personal journey, seeing the many times that, again, God never moves. He hasn't gone anywhere, but I'm sure moving all over the place and around him and dancing around him and avoiding him and not going near him, and just all the years of really not even knowing truly who he was. I think that it's just really important that we recognize as his daughters and sons, if you're listening, that what Jesus has done on the cross for us, and the fact that he did all the work, he hung on the cross, he is the one that suffered, he died, and he rose from the grave. He conquered death for us. He did that for us. Our Christian faith is not in our doing. Our Christian faith is simply receiving that, acknowledging it and receiving it. And the fact that we can't earn it, we don't have to open up an invitation and then do a checklist. We just open it and let it sink into our hearts. We just say yes to it. I think like that's really the goal of our book, and the heart of it is recognizing that that's how he loves, and he's done it all. We just get to receive it and love it, and we can't do anything. We can't do anything because of it. And so that's the beauty in it. And I think just these invitations, and I share in the opening and the introduction just my own personal journey of recognizing these hard places in my life, and you can read about that, but recognizing that those are each just another tear in that invitation for me, in really fully opening and seeing, whoa, this is here for me. This is what's been done for me. Are you serious? Like, it's almost like I didn't know. And so then seeing it for the first time, it's like, what in the world? It's like the greatest invitation, and we're all invited. We're all invited to the party.
Yeah.
And like, so I just, each one is just another invitation for us to really just partner and walk and trust God in our marriage and in our own lives too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that those listening were blessed. I was blessed. I loved learning this insight. And again, all the information to find Amanda and ways to connect with her will be in the show notes. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for listening. Super fun. Thanks, Sherry.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to episode 103. I loved Amanda's message that we are all invited into a deeper place of connection with God and our spouse. If this message would encourage a friend, please share it, and make sure that you don't miss an episode by subscribing to Your Spiritual Game Plan, the podcast, and my newsletter. In the show notes, you will find links on how to connect with Amanda, purchase her book, and learn more about her ministry. You will also find links on how you can connect with me. I would love to hear your stories, your thoughts, or aha moments from today's message. Your feedback gives me ideas and encouragement on who to have as guests or blog post topics that I can write about. Remember, God has always had a plan, and you have a purpose in it.